there's been so much misinformation about Rasta, and as time goes on, Rasta gets fuzzier and fuzzier to the mainstream world. And they have all these misconceptions about Rasta. And yet there's this reverence for Rasta, but at the same time there's no commitment to the ancestral history and culture that has brought this country. So what I'm saying is that there's so much we need to come, if possible, and if you agree, we'd like to come back and invigorate people's respect and understanding of the culture.
Because the thing is, 5 years ago, 2015, the government is asking the question, who is Rastafari?
Oh my goodness.
And now moving along here. And again, big shout out to the Rastaman's Traders Circle. We're going to look to expand that a bit as it is, only just a couple of brothers here or there that have been discussing certain things, especially as economics and, the financial markets and how to get involved and, actually presenting ones with some active practical applications that they can use right here in the here and now. Also a big shout out to the So Eco Media Street Team members on the WhatsApp group. As we are sharing other information there as well, other practical applications. Again, some things that can be applied in the here and now, usable information that ones can actually take advantage of, while the time allows. But just giving certain matters a different look and also a more in-depth look as we have done our best to try to make sure that ones not only stay calm in this situation, but keep their competency about them. Because this is a very critical time, even though certain ones may even take a great joy in knowing that the situation or the current biohazard as it stands currently is being, or at least the curve is being flattened in a sense, though it clearly has shown great detrimental hits, especially in said particular areas where there are a heavy amount of the population that resides in those areas. But even so, stretching across not only those major cities, but in also other parts of the U.S. in particular, as well as the rest of the Western Hemisphere, whether that be Canada, Mexico, so on and so forth, and stretching, of course, across the world. Many ones are being affected, especially those in Europe. Just seeing how this entire situation has potentially changed the world, but it will be yet to be seen for the better or worse. That fact still remains to be examined or even so explored upon and even observed in certain senses where certain matters are concerned. But coming to a report which we had shared with the Rastaman's Trader Circle group members and just tidbits here or there for the So Eco Media Street Team WhatsApp group as well. But kind of getting into a lot more of the terminology of many of the financial advisors, the particular CPAs, or the tax professionals, more economists, certain pundits or analysts, so on and so forth. This jargon, is a very powerful tool, especially when utilizing this to kind of, in a way, certify oneself as a gatekeeper, and even so, a solidified member of a certain group or a certain, I guess you can say, community in a sense, whether that be, tangible or intangible for that matter. But even so, much of the participation leads to many tangible assets, many tangible dealings, and that really, kind of shows how powerful words can be, especially when effectively communicating a message to and fro, and also disseminating that information to those who, may be so in the know, or even in that sense really taken, the time to educate themselves on certain matters that go a little bit beyond the surface. So we come here to this report by a one John Elkington. And John Elkington, I must be honest and say that I wasn't very familiar with a lot of his work, but after kind of coming across this particular article, this particular information that he has put out, we delve into a little bit more of what he has presented so far on up until this point as this latest publication that he has here for the reading, which we will expound upon in only a moment, just giving a little bit of the backstory and the history on what will be presented by A1 Mr. Elkington. But, a very credible source, a business advisor, analyst himself, also entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur at that. So one that is very, very active in certain matters of business and also economics on that sense. But, just again, giving his opinion in certain realms, and even so being reviewed by, I guess we can say, a class of his peers. In that sense, having certain works reviewed not only by the New York Best Times sellers books, or making that list, and many other regards, but also having a lot of his literary work reviewed by certain ones at Harvard and many other prestigious collegiate institutions, as well as media outlets, and just really giving again the backstory and the history on the person, which we will be reading a little bit of this information that he has shared just in this coming year during this specific month, as we are quickly coming to the close of it, or at least from the sound of this recording. As we present this, it is set still to be April 29, 2020, but surely will be into the next month of May by the time ones will hear this, specific recording itself. But very interesting article here from the Elkington Report, shared, of course, and kind of, I guess we can say, proctored, or in another sense, shared or disseminated through greenbiz.com. But just interesting topics here, which we will share with ones, and hopefully they will take, a few notes, and also educate themselves a bit more on a lot of the entirety of the economics of this whole thing. And again, this all pertaining to the particular current situation we find ourselves in at the moment, with the current situation being what it is as far as the biohazard issues are concerned. But I hear from the Elkington Report, dated April 13th of 2020, by a one Mr. John Elkington, entitled Turning Black Swans Green. Now, before we actually get into the specifics of the article, we'd also like to share a little bit of what a particular quote-unquote black swan as a concept is concerned. Not particularly the animal for which we know as a swan is, but the euphemism, or the metaphor of what ones will be using. And again, we go back to the jargon of what certain ones, or pundits, or analysts, or economists will use within a lot of their explanations of a lot of these events which have taken place in the past, those we are seeing in the present, and those which they project will happen in the future. But here from social sciences at the Department of Economics in Warwick, they're out there in the UK. Here just sharing a little bit of information for ones, again, to take notes and research for themselves as well. Adapting to the entirely unpredictable, black swans, fat tails, aberrant events, and hubristic models. Just a little snippet here for ones to become a little bit acquainted with what a black swan is. Since the spring of 2007, economist or economic theorist Peter Hammond has been working on a Marie Curie research project called Adapting to Entirely Unpredictable. Here, he comments on some aspects of a well-known book apparently on the same topic by one Nassim Nicholas Taleb's The Black Swan, The Impact of the Highly Improbable, published in 2007. In 82 AD, Juvenal wrote a rara avi interi nigroque similia senio. This is Latin for a rare bird upon earth and exceedingly like a black swan. But that was imaginative irony. In the year 1697, Willem de Vlamingh was the first European to record seeing a real live black swan in its native Australian habitat. Later, John Stuart Mill wrote, "No amount of observation of white swans can allow the inference that all swans are white, but the observation of a single black swan is sufficient to refute that conclusion." It became a classical example in elementary philosophy. Taleb's book provides many vivid examples of events often related to finance or economics, which he sees as meeting his characterization of a quote unquote black swan event as an outlier with an extreme impact for which human nature makes us concoct explanations after the event. The book was written before the recent crisis in global financial markets. Nevertheless, it does discuss several earlier crises, such as the stock market crash of October 1987, which are often plausibly blamed on faulty statistic models. Total aberrant black swan events are those with no probabilities are attached because our models do not even contemplate their possibility. Indeed, at an early stage of his book, Taleb defines a special case of gray swans, which are rare but expected. More precisely, they have probability distributions described by Mandelbrottian randomness, quote unquote, a particular class of fat-tailed probability distribution following a power law. These distributions put so much weight on outliers or extreme values of a random variable, v, that for large enough, k as the symbol here, the expectation of the kth power of v as an equation otherwise known as the kth moment of the distribution becomes infinite. This is in stark contrast to the normal or Gaussian distribution for what the tail of a distribution is so thin that all moments exist. Yet this is typically not the issue with the random value of an asset, especially a derivative security. For these, there is a positive probability of losing everything. This kind of extreme risk cannot be captured by a Gaussian distribution or by any smooth alternative such as a power law. But there is little really new here, since statisticians and financial economists, along with decision and game theorists, have been coming to terms with probability distributions that do not correspond to a smoothly density function. Much more challenging than these gray swans, however, are the true black swans, which effectively break our existing scientific models. The eponymous example is when Europeans first became aware of the black swan species, now called the Synios atratus. Since that broke any of their previous biological models of the genus Synios, Taleb does recognize that such events could occur, but regards them as totally intractable, scientifically speaking. Nevertheless, biologists have formulated statistical models intended to forecast probabilistically the likely number of new species that one might expect to find in a poorly explored habitat. And economists have developed many models of economic growth with technical progress, which may be approximately treated as the accumulation of many small but favorable surprises. More generally, any practical model, especially in the social sciences, must have bounded scope and so must ignore some real possibilities that could occur and have a noticeable impact. Recent examples include several bank failures and the first UK bank run in over 100 years. So can important new scientific discoveries relating to climate change or its mitigation. This could be described as aberrant events, which by definition lie outside the current model and the occurrence of which effectively breaks the model. Indeed, aberrant events should be distinguished from events within the model, which, like Talib's gray swans, are recognized but giving extremely low or even zero probability. And we'll cut the reading off here from that Department of Economics, Social Sciences, Warwick, there in the UK, reading as to show again for ones to kind of become familiar again with a lot of the jargon that is used or a lot of the wordplay that is used within a lot of these financial discussions, these economic evaluations, and kind of the speech patterns that a lot of the finance gurus, or at least ones who would be more so known as analysts, kind of use to describe certain situations. But again, returning to our main report here at hand and dealing with the current situation which we have here in front of us, Mr. John Elkington writes a report entitled again, Turning Black Swans Green, as ones would know now that a black swan event, by a shorthand definition, would be something that is completely unpredictable, an event that can be very shape-shifting from the norm and very out of the ordinary, just to say the least in that sense. But again, this report here, starting from Mr. John Elkington, starts off as such. Hard-hit companies increasingly blame disastrous corporate performance on black swan events, quote-unquote. Brazilian miner Vale declared force majeure last year on iron ore contracts after a deadly dam burst killed more than 300 people. The company and some analysts dub the disaster as a black swan. This reading was challenged, however, by investors selling their holdings. Adam Matthews, Director of Ethics and Engagement for the Church of England Pensions Board, said, simply put, these failures of tailing dams should not be happening. These are not black swan events. Then in February, Alibaba CEO Daniel Zhang warned that the COVID-19 coronavirus outbreak and could become a black swan event, derailing global growth. Again, it is worth considering whether even this biohazard merits that labeling, just as earlier dam breaches highlighting the risk facing mining companies, so outbreaks of SARS and other diseases repeatedly have underscored the health risks posed by wet markets, quote-unquote, selling wildlife products at a time when China is intimately and increasingly intertwined with the rest of the world. When Nassim Nicholas Taleb launched the Black Swan concept in 2007 on the threshold of the financial crash, he was very specific about what he meant. A black swan, he said, is an event that comes as an immense surprise, has a major impact, and is often poorly understood and rationalized afterwards. He has argued that the current biohazard is not a black swan. The increasing use and misuse of his term is not just driven by CEOs looking for new alibis, although some may be. Instead, increasingly exponential times raise the likelihood of black swan outcomes. As a result, some people now also talk of gray swans, quote-unquote, events that can take or have a massive impact that are considered unlikely to happen, but that are still seen as possible. Both the Vale and Alibaba usages then might be recast as gray swans. We should have seen them coming and acted sooner. On the upside, however, it turns out that the black swans can create the conditions in which a different species of exponential outcome can become much more likely. In my 20th book, Mr. Elkington writes, Green Swans, subtitled The Coming Boom in Regenerative Capitalism, published by Fast Company Press, he continues riffing off the Black Swan idea, a process he began in GreenBiz or greenbiz.com last year. So what would Green Swan outcomes look like, and how might we best co-evolve them? The Green Swan is a symbol of radically better times to come. Getting from here to there will be no trivial task, however. Times of disruptive change up in market and political pecking orders, creating social and political shock waves that can last for decades, even generations. Green swans are profound market shifts, and as noted in his new book, generally catalyzed by some combination of black or gray swan challenges and changing paradigms, values, mindsets, politics, policies, technologies, business models, and other key factors. A green swan delivers exponential progress in the form of economic, social, and environmental wealth creation. At worst, it achieves this outcome in two dimensions while holding the third steady. There may be a period of adjustment where one or more dimensions underperform, but the aim is an integrated breakthrough in all three dimensions. Green swans, worthy of the name, will include the rapid electrification of our mobility and transportation systems, the exponential evolution of machine learning and artificial intelligence or AI design to help manage our businesses, supply chains, and economies in the evolving Anthropocene, and the emergence of new behaviors, including the growing appetite for plant-based diets. Happily, in a time likely to be plagued by a growing number of black swan challenges, aka quote-unquote wicked or even super wicked problems, our work suggests that green swan solutions often rise, phoenix-like, from the ashes of black swan disasters. But while most black swans emerge unbidden, green swans must be worked on and invested in over extended time scales. In the economic domain, recent green swan breakthroughs have included the rapid spread of cell phone technology and internet linking us in new ways and massively boosting the prospects for self-education and the staggering cost reductions for solar and wind power systems. In the social domain, green swan trajectories have been followed by universal schooling in many countries. The evolution of vaccine technology, despite recent anti-vaccine rumors and propaganda, and the growth of social movements focusing on environmentalism, social enterprise, and impact investment. When it comes to the environment, there are such ecosystem restoration projects as the progressive recovery of the Iraqi marsh ecosystem destroyed by Saddam Hussein's forces, and the progressive regreening of China's Loess Plateau, a cradle of early Chinese civilization. All of these depend at some point in the story on political will and public investment. So another striking example could be the European Union's just announced $1.09 trillion Green Deal, designed to deliver an integrated set of economic, social, and environmental outcomes in the face of the gathering climate emergency. Once again, a black swan, if there ever was one, hatching or at least helping incubate a green one, creating the necessary conditions and incentives for such innovation requires a radical expression of the current responsibility frame in which most corporate sustainability efforts operate. We now need a much more systematic focus on ensuring our economic, social, and environmental systems are resilient and, where necessary, regenerated. This is the largely untold story behind climate activist Christiana Fugredes, Rallying call. This is the decade, and we are the generation. And that concludes the reading there. And again, just getting one's acquainted with much of, again, the wording, a lot of the wordplay that many analysts, economists, and many other business professionals will continue to use as they have so many times before, especially during specific situations such as these, where in many cases where certain events like this take place, and a lot of the well-learned people tend to speak clearly over the heads of the masses of the people. And with what we intend to share on our platforms and many other platforms, if we are ever so allowed, to share as much of this information as possible so that more ones will become forearmed and forewarned of what exactly is going on in the world at any given specific time, and they are able to assess their situation to the best of their ability and also make a case for themselves, also creating a situation that will be more favorable to them, those closest around them, their family members, etc., etc. And hopefully they will come out much better than they had than the times past.